I've had several people ask me about VR settings for ACC, so I thought I'd just do a real quick video just showing you my settings so you can use them hopefully as a starting point to help tune your setup. Again, I'm using an R5 3600 and 2070 Super, 16 gigs of RAM. But so full screen up here in the top menu doesn't matter, it's up to you. I don't do full screen because to record I like to be able to jump around through windows, and I have a monitor with a bigger resolution than that, so I usually do full screen disabled and set it to 1920 by 1080. These settings don't affect your VR, they really just affect your what's going on in the monitor, so you don't have to pay too much attention to it, especially if you're not recording. But those are my settings for that part. These are the ones that matter. So for your resolution scale, this is the big one. This is what affects your performance more than anything. And I tried a lot to work with 90% or 100%. And I think the best way for me to do that resolution scale, if that's really what you want, is to turn on forced motion smoothing, which is the asynchronous space warping that Oculus does, which basically cuts your frame rate in half, but then uses interpolation to render double the frame. So it tries to predict what's happening from one frame to the next. But if you want a true, for me, I'm using the Oculus Quest, you get 72 frames per second. I need to really crank the resolution scale down. I had good luck at around 70% resolution scale, but I also tried going down to 60 just to see how much it impacted the graphics, and honestly I don't think it's impacted the graphics that much for me, and it does seem to help with performance. So experiment with that in the 60 to 70% range, I think, for resolution scale, and you should you'll really pick up some performance that will let you turn things like these other settings up a bit, and these are what are so important. I like to have the view distance up high. You can probably set this down to medium and it's not that big a deal. The shadow detail, and if you have more information on this, please let me know. I want my shadow detail up high for a couple reasons. One, I want to make sure the cars look like they're grounded to the track. If the shadows are low, sometimes you get the floating car effect, which is really just kind of, it's distracting, I guess. Shadow distance, for the same reason, I like to have the shadow distance up to epic. Shadows are very taxing on your system, so if you're really struggling, play with these settings a bit and maybe take those down a notch or two. Anti-aliasing, I've tried high and epic. I can't say that I see much difference in the graphical clarity between high and epic, so I don't know that there's much point in VR to run more than high. So I would start with high, and if you're still struggling, messing with shadows and the anti-aliasing level is a good place to try to recoup some frame rate. Anti-aliasing type, I think a lot of people use temporal. I don't like that as much because it adds kind of like a faded, soft texture to the screen for me. I think the KTAA looks sharper and clearer. It may be that the temporal is kind of smoother and softer edges on everything, and the KTAA is just harder, sharper edges. So it may be a personal preference thing, but give them both a shot. I think the temporal might have a performance advantage. It might be more efficient, I'm not sure. But running KTAA on high, I think you should at least experiment between the temporal and the KTAA. The FXAA I don't think is worth using. But I think the KTAA will make everything look a little clearer and sharper. Effects, I have these set to mid. I'm honestly not too certain where these come into play. I don't know that it's too taxing in your system. I've left it at mid, but you could try lowering that. It probably won't be too distracting to lower that. Post-processing, it's one of the big filters that makes things look pretty, and the fancy lighting, not important to me in VR. I'd much rather have better performance, so I've left that at low. Foliage is at low for me. Texture you can leave at high or epic. It depends on how much memory your graphics card has. So I've got an 8GB graphics card, so I don't have any issues with loading higher quality textures. If you have a graphics card with less video memory, maybe turn this down to medium or low if you need to. Mirror distance is pretty important because you certainly want to be able to see cars behind you when you're checking your mirrors. I have mine set pretty high at 80. You can experiment with this a little bit to get back some frame rate as well. Mirror quality, I have it low, and it's not distracting to me. I think I get enough car information that I think running mirror quality low in VR is fine. Same with the mirror resolution. This is kind of a big one. The opponent's visibility, the more cars that it's trying to render, really does make a big impact on your performance. So maybe at 16 for me is a little bit too much. I just did a test race at Laguna Seca, and I think it was hitting my computer pretty hard. So I think I might try lowering that down to 12 or so. So that should be, you know, up to 6 in front, 6 behind. That's really more than you need. I think if you can see, you know, maybe 4 cars in front and 3 or 4 in back, that's kind of the minimum that you'll need just to be able to race efficiently, to kind of plan what you want to do when corners bunch up and things like that. That's definitely a setting to play with to recoup some performance. This is the next really big one. So resolution scale is probably the most important as far as to get performance, to get frame rate. VR pixel density is what makes it look good if you start lowering the resolution scale a lot. This is similar to super sampling as far as I understand, but at 60% resolution scale, I'm able to do 140% pixel density, and honestly in VR things look pretty good. The detail is enough that I'm able to read the dash and see information, you know, on the dash about lap times and things like that. And it's still able to run pretty smoothly, usually for me. If you're struggling, I would hope that you could run this at least 120, 125%. If you can't run at, let's say you pick 70% on your resolution scale and you're trying to run 130 or 120% on the VR pixel density, if your computer's struggling, I think you should go and lower the resolution scale and try to maintain super sampling in the 120 to 140 range if you can. I think that will help sharpen up things in the distance and some of the in-car details, like on your dash while you're driving, so you can see better. The virtual to real scale, I think as I understand this, is just basically how big do you want the world, do you want things in the world around you to be. Like if you're sitting in the car and you feel the car is much bigger than it should be, or it's much smaller inside than it should be, I think changing the virtual to real scale will fix that. I just leave it at 100. Materials quality, I've got it high. Temporal upsampling, I have this on enabled because I was using the temporal aliasing before, but I don't know that this is having any effect for me now that I'm in KTAA, but I do have it enabled. Bloom quality, again, that's just some eye candy stuff that I turn off. Volumetric fog, again, eye candy, turned it off. The foliage level of detail quality, I've got this set to low, and I think it's fine at low. It doesn't seem to bother me. I don't really notice issues with the foliage as I'm driving. The car LOD quality, now this is one that I don't think I understood what it did initially, and I had a couple of really big complaints initially with VR and ACC, and one of them was that as I was, certainly at the start of the races when you're right up on cars, and the thing that I always remember is I was behind a Bentley, and when I was really close to it, you know, 5-10 meters away from it, the textures on the car looked really nice, but as soon as it creeped out to, you know, 10-15 meters away, it was like the game dumbed down its textures dramatically. So when the car looked really good up close, it was rendering a completely different thing once the car got a little bit farther away from me. And it looked awful. It was very distracting. It was like kind of a texture pop-in thing. Like it was just generating really nice textures and then really bad textures. And I couldn't figure out which setting affected that. And I think it's this car LOD quality. I assume that this is something that you can gain lots of performance. I don't know if a lot of performance, but it's worth messing with. I like to have this up high because I don't want the cars to look different, you know, whether they're 5 meters away or 15 meters away. I just want the car to be the car. So experiment with that setting if you're having weird texture pop-ins. I don't know what that cutoff is, and certainly once in VR things look so blurry and fuzzy once they get far away anyways. So there's probably some good middle ground here. 90% may be too high. It may be that at a level of 90% that they're so far down the track that it doesn't matter that it's rendering those better textures. You know, maybe I can get some frame rate back. So I'll probably experiment some with that too, but I believe this is the setting that's causing that, if that's driving you crazy, because it's driving me crazy. This is the hierarchy level of detail. You want this enabled for VR. The advanced sharpen filter I think is too taxing. Experiment with it if you'd like to, but for me I think it was a good idea to avoid this. And then these are just some more just personal preference things. I do have sharpness set up to 200%. Play with that some and see how you like it. But those are my settings for ACC, and I've been pretty happy with them now. I don't have to fiddle with things too much anymore. There's a couple of things I still might do. Like I might experiment, like we were just talking about, with this the car level of detail quality, and see if I can make things a little bit easier on my computer. And then I probably will turn the number of cars drawn down from 16 to probably to 12 or so, and see if that helps a little bit for race starts. Usually when the field spreads out, it gets pretty good, and I don't really have much of an issue. But I hope that's helpful, and enjoy ACC because it's a really good game.